the numbers dropped, with the organizations that I work with, the numbers dropped at the beginning because they were still trying to figure out how to do virtual, right? But since then, it's been, a full group. Like, for example, local organization I work with, they combined two locations for one virtual outpatient, right? Because they didn't have enough to have all the counselors. Now they're so full that both locations are wide open and they're packed. I mean, you get like 18 to 20 people on a Zoom meeting because of this. And what's cool about it is I've actually, I would say half the people in my Monday meeting I've never met in person, which means they got sober during COVID. And that is amazing. And it's an amazing amount of positivity that I find. Because a lot of folks, when the wheels finally do come off, they realize that, the training wheels had been off for a while or whatever. And just the fact that they lost their controls, meant that they fell. But then they fell and they figured out that they fell and they picked themselves up and they said, hey, man, let's go fix it. So I think that's a huge positive thing that's with that. But yeah, you asked what I'm talking about with the tip of the iceberg is, we're talking about, financials, right? So everybody's been able to stretch it a little bit. There's a tip of the iceberg on foreclosures that are coming down, on rent, that people have been in arrears. That all the sorts of financial things are coming down the pipe. With the same token, the mental health and the substance issues. The last, I'm a nerd, right? I mean, the Kaiser Foundation, it's an article that I've been reading over the last couple of days, though. They partnered up with the census, and it was about the impact of COVID. And this is where they went from, and working with NAMI, and they went from, hey, 1 in 5 Americans have a mental illness to 1 in 3 have a mental illness. And like the increase of disorders, like somewhere on the realm of like 40%. And, that's interesting because I think that's the tip of the iceberg, because these things don't get better automatically. They go the other direction, right? So we have this recognized diagnosed issue, right? Well, then how much is unrecognized and undiagnosed, right? Because these are the people that haven't talked to their doctors. These are the people that haven't raised their hand that says, I have a problem. And these are the people that nobody's found passed out in their own vomit, right? So they haven't been tagged yet. And so just, a lot of what I think and what I've been reading is a lot of the coping mechanisms that people have been using that thought they would be short-term coping mechanisms are now turning into long-term disorders, right? Because you can do something for a short period of time and that's acceptable as long as you stop. I mean, think about pain pills, right? You're supposed to take them for 7 days because, after surgery or whatever, but what happens is people don't stop, right? And that's fine. You can take it for 7 days. But when you take it for 30, 40, 365 days, that's when you're like, hey, man, you're dependent and you got a problem. So I think people have stretched their coping mechanism to the point now it's become to the disorder function aspect of it. And what is the definition of disorder? It's distress and impairment, right? So does something bother you enough that it interrupts your total life, like you're distressed, or which is subjective, or it's an objective thing, which is you are now impaired, right? So you're impaired in your external functions, or you're extremely distressed in your internal functions. I mean, that's what disorder is. And so you can take a coping mechanism and use it for a period of time and not cross over in that disorder spectrum. But now that you've used it long enough, where everything else is starting to become secondary, you've now shifted into disorder. And that's what I think we're at the tip of the iceberg, is because there's a lot of people that, for example, the new control is nobody sees me, right? So, the other control was I got to get up in the morning, I got to shave, I got to go to work, I got to do stuff like that, right? But now the other control is nobody sees me, and so nobody knows how bad I am. And so when you finally get to see the person or finally get to interact with the person, you realize that they're a train wreck, right? And that's where I'm talking about, is you're shifting from, albeit an unhealthy coping mechanism. I don't use the word right or wrong because it's not a moral coping mechanism, but there are healthier coping mechanisms than substances. But you're using it long enough to shift over into the disorder spectrum. And that's kind of where I'm talking about tip of the iceberg, because we're going to see it all rolling down. And I think the number one thing that I talk about with Unonymous and I talk about with mental health and stigmas is exactly that. There's nothing wrong with it, right? You're not bad. You're not evil. You didn't make you didn't ruin your life. This isn't a moral decision. This is, you're a human. You're fallible. You use what you had. And guess what? It wasn't very healthy. So let's help you find something different. And that's the message, right? Because there's a lot of people that have a lot of negativity rolling around their life right now. Like you said, family, finances, everything else. The last thing they want to be, that we want to be doing with them is dropping a hammer on what's wrong with you? You're an addict, or something like that, right? It's more like, hey, your coping mechanism got you here, so let's help you learn a new coping mechanism. And that to me is what recovery mental health is anyway. So